We are live talking about plastic today.
And once again, we have a new third party. For the first time ever, Robert
Hey.
is on the show.
Yes, very excited.
Yeah. Also, for the first time, this isn't at my house. I apologize if there eventually is any background noise.
This is the first time we have somebody from over the sea.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah, you're the
many.
first.
I was ahead of you at the minute, but it's good.
You're the first non-American to talk about this show. What's going on? Why did this take us so long?
Oh yeah, it's unusual for British people to talk about Doctor Who, isn't it?
Yep.
Very unusual.
It's weird that our show has just been nothing but Americans talking about basically still belongs to you guys.
And to be fair, Americans are for the most part the only people with enough classlessness to use Facebook regularly.
That's true.
Shots fired. At whom, I don't know.
I think at ourselves.
That said, Praxeus time, and as is the norm, my thoughts have already been documented in the scripted review. Those, unlike, I suppose, a lot of my other scripted stuff, tend not to shy away from spoilers, so I suppose either of you guys should be among the first to give your thoughts on this episode. What did you think? I know because of secret correspondence that Lucy practically fell asleep.
Pretty much. I guess I'll just say mine really quickly because it won't take very long. It's an episode.
You know, that's true. That is a true fact.
It exists.
It exists. I mean, the television flickered.
Kind of the same. I watched it. I kind of was interested in it. It was an interesting concept, I thought. Actually, one of the more interesting ones of the series. But I don't know. It was okay. I thought the ending was a bit rushed.
Yeah.
I didn't think the supporting characters really made much of an impression. And, it was all right. I think as far as like a climate change episode, it handled the topic better than Orphan 55 did pretty easily.
Just so that no one gets on our case, let's not necessarily conflate climate change with every form of environmentalism, because being aware of climate change and making sure that plastics aren't the thing, those are two separate issues, just so that no one can get on us in the comments of
clarification at the end. Well, environmental issue then, yeah.
At first I heard a bunch of people saying that this one was handled very well. It wasn't in your face and stuff. But then I hear other people trying to say, "Oh, it was in your face," and I'm like, it's almost non-existent.
Well, I think as long as they build a story around it, it was not really an issue for me, because Doctor Who's always been very political. It's a very political type of show. Well, and you notice that a lot generally when you get older, especially. So, I think it handled it better because it didn't feel tacked on like Orphan 55, where it felt like they just randomly decided to just give you a lecture at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Integrated into the story, and it wasn't really in your face at all, besides maybe one scene.
I wish I'd thought to make that point while talking about Orphan 55 at any point, because I really struggled while talking about that episode to sort of put into words what I thought people were sort of trying to say about it when criticizing it and weren't quite making the point that they thought they were. And in the end, it ended up being just that, which is the problem isn't that it's preachy. The problem isn't that get your politics out of my Doctor Who. The problem is it's not part of the story.
Story of that episode. I'm still confused.
And none of it really has anything to do with the fact that climate change created any of this stuff. To hear the environmental message, it's sort of the exact opposite of Orphan 55, where at no point do we stop and lecture about plastics are bad. The closest thing we get to it is the Doctor explaining it to Graham, and it's that's not a lecture about the message, that's a plot point, that's exposition. We built the story and the plot points around the thing, and so we can make our point, we can make the political statement, but it doesn't feel like just there for its own sake. It's part of the narrative.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
It's integrated into the story fine. Anybody that has a problem with this environmental message or plastic message, they're reaching. I'm sorry.
I really wonder, because again, this is the main thesis of my point in the scripted video, which is I agree totally, Robert, that the whole episode definitely has I'm not going to say a pace issue because I actually kind of like it for the most part, but it's got a very particular thing going on with the pacing, like from the first scene. Orphan 55 had this thing where it was just a lot of kind of empty space. Every scene had a bit too much time to breathe. And like I'm fine with letting scenes breathe and stuff. But when we got a cast this big and none of it is really being spent on character moments, it's really weird. So here we make space for the character moments by making sure that all the plot stuff happens super fast. And I feel like that's not a problem until that last third, where like we get the reveal with Suki, and it's like, why wasn't more of the episode about this person and their plight? Because that's really, really interesting. I like with the subtlety of the plastic message. The real thing that makes that interesting from a plot perspective is not that it's like, oh, humanity ruined the world or whatever. When we think about all the things, plastic and like pollution and like plastic being all over the oceans and stuff does to the planet, the last thing we ever think about is the fact that it's now inside of our bodies. It's one of those like proto-Cybermen type things where it's like we keep doing this thing in like human nature and reality and sci-fi especially, where we take inorganic materials and we put them in the human body. And how much can we do with that until we stop being what we were before? Like that's a really interesting thing with the bad guy in Deep Breath, where he started out as like a living thing and he keeps adding parts to himself. And the doctor's like, you keep replacing parts, you keep adding things. How long until you're not the thing that you started out as? It feels almost weird to use this language, but when Suki and her species shows up, it's like, we searched for galaxies, like we looked planet after planet after planet, and humans are where we found the thing where it's like, perfect, we can test our like cure, we can look for the cure for the Praxeus on this species, because the Praxeus feeds on plastic, and these guys have plastic in them, and it's their own fault. And it's like, we were kind of asking for it. And I'd like for more of it to be about that. This isn't any sort of like malicious thing. Like even the malicious party here, which again is always like corporate, like big structures that don't care about how much plastic they put in the oceans. They didn't plan to make human beings part plastic. That just kind of happened.
Also, I have to ask, this might be a nitpick or maybe me not paying attention enough. If they're trying to like make a vaccine to save their people, and the vaccine only works on humans, isn't that counterproductive?
That's the point. That's the whole scene about that, which is like Suki is in such a rush to find a cure, she didn't take into account the differences in the species. And the doctor's like, we found a cure for humans. Tell me you did not use that on yourself already, because we don't know if it'll work for you. And of course it doesn't work for her.
Yeah, I felt that was a little stupid since she is like a scientist and all that. I mean, I guess you can chalk it up. She's just desperate. And why?
Yeah, I like that because like she's really desperate.
I just wish they would have hammered in that point a little bit more, because is she stupid or desperate?
I definitely took it as desperate just because, well, that's
I go with Robert both.
Yeah, that's the both is kind of the thing, because desperation makes you stupid. You can be a not stupid person and become stupid because you're desperate, and I think that's what happened.
Yeah, stupid gene just takes over.
Like I mentioned in the review that I really like Molly Harris's performance, and I feel like it's gonna be it's like doomed to be one of those underappreciated like one episode supporting role performances, where it's like one of my favorite bits is like in the context of knowing what her deal is, right before the twist, when the doctor finds the cure and is like, if we do this, then we could do this. And she's like, you're right. And she gets this grin on her face, which at first just reads as like, oh, that's a good idea. But like knowing the context, oh my God, you did it. I found the thing that I needed. This fixes everything. This is like my whole deal, and you solved it. You can read like, oh, it's perfect. I can my mission is done. The desperation is over. But then like the twist happens, it's like, oh no, you're right. I jumped the gun. And you can read on her face when the doctor's like, no, this is a human cure. Like to your point, you can see on her face where it's like, oh my God, I was an idiot. Like you can see that in the performance, and I really like it.
I'm interested in. Did either of you see the twist coming? Because I didn't.
Not
I
for a
don't
second.
think they hinted at it like in any way or anything like that.
Well, see, the thing about that is, I wouldn't say they needed to hint at it, aside from like the one-off line about like, oh wow, it's really convenient that you have all this stuff here that so happens to be the stuff that we need. But whatever. The thing about it that makes it weird is Arambu, her first scene in this episode is her with someone else, and the doctor's not there, and it's with someone that she's working with. And like the question is, was he also a member of her species? Or was he a human being who didn't know what the deal was?
Red shirt.
Yeah. But like here's what makes it weird. If there's no explicit foreshadowing, whatever, that's fine. Like the point is that we're kind of not meant to question it. She's in the background for a lot. If we open the episode with her and someone else who maybe knows what the deal is, but maybe doesn't, then the way that the two of them interact off each other informs how we see her a lot. So when he says, this is not a normal day, and she's like, no, it's not. The reason that you have that exchange there is to be like, these are two normal people who don't experience like whatever this is. It's like, no, that's not what she is. So is that just her saying what he wants to hear? Or is that a case of weird writing where they're both aliens and he's just kind of saying that for the audience's benefit? And we never find out, so we can't be sure.
I just love, that guy basically just gets abandoned on the beach. Then about 5 minutes later, we just see a scene where he just dies. That just made me laugh when I watched it, because I was just like, wow, they just forgot about that guy completely, and now he's dead.
No, they didn't forget about it completely, because what I love is that, like, right before that happens, Graham comes in from outside, where, like, he was out there, and he's like, Arambu says the birds are getting antsy. It's like, yeah, they're getting antsy. Like, you shouldn't have left him behind. 5 seconds from now, he's going to get eaten alive.
Yeah. We just left him out there to die.
Oh, wait. That guy.
We have at least one casualty into the group before the ending.
Yeah, which again, it's a thing that I haven't really seen people complain about, but it's sort of a thing with the Chibnall era where it's like we're a bit less lethal than the Moffat and Russell eras were, where we were just killing side characters all over the place.
I think an issue I've found with the Chibnall era, usually, especially this season, there's too many characters in the episode. I think there was an issue in this one, particularly, which I think caused a lot of them to go underdeveloped. Like the girl with the camera,
Gabriella, yeah.
Had a vlog. She contributed absolutely nothing to the episode, in my opinion. She also accepted her friend just dying very quickly. Completely forgot about it.
In the scene where it happened, she reacts to it well, and then I'm like,
yeah,
why not after that? This is weird. And like
she's like cracking jokes, running around like, I can't remember what specifically her lines were, but she seems to be in a good mood for most of the episode. Like,
yeah.
Just, I'm on an adventure type of thing. And your best friend just got disintegrated right in front of you.
You saw her explode.
Maybe she was just some random girl she just dragged along to Peru or something, but maybe that's an explanation.
Well, no, because they emphasize over and over again that they're best friends.
Well, that makes it worse.
Could be a lie. Could be a lie.
I guess. They could be lying for them sweet, sweet YouTube hits.
Yeah.
Oh, who would do that? No. I refuse to believe that.
The secret is out, you guys. The fact is that everyone who's ever on this channel actually despises each other. Lucy, Edward, Robert, Malik, me, my sister, we're all like the worst enemies. We just pretend to be friends for the YouTube videos.
Yeah,
conspiracy.
No,
right now, I'm typing a Facebook post saying, you guys.
I'm a bit kinder to it with this episode, again, than Orphan 55, because Orphan 55 is kind of like, I hate to be so mean to it, because again, it's not like the worst thing the show has ever done, but it's just such a good example of like badness, where it's like, compared to every other episode in Series 12, it's been such a good benchmark for like, well, okay, at least Spyfall did this, where Orphan 55 didn't do that. At least Nikola Tesla did this, and Orphan 55 couldn't do that. So at least this episode, with like the number of characters, at least it's only really Gabriella who feels pointless, and maybe also Aaron.
I can't remember their names.
Arambu's the one who gets eaten by the birds. And he's
the red shirt guy, yeah.
Yeah. To what degree is it the names aren't memorable, and to what degree is it they just don't say the names a lot? Because I find that that's also a thing with a lot of things.
That's not actually a very strong criticism for me, because when I hear people say, I can't remember their name, I don't really think that's a strong criticism, because it just might mean, as you said, that the name might not be mentioned enough.
Yeah, and it's like, I feel bad about it sometimes where like Rogue One, because Lucy knows this, Edward and I are in the very early stages of doing a collaborative Rogue One review, and like I hear that complaint about that movie a lot. Like, I bet you don't remember any of the characters' names. No, but that's because one, they're weird Star Wars names. Two, a lot of actors in this movie have very heavy accents. And three, the names aren't in the dialogue very often.
Yeah, I can't remember Felicity Jones's name, to be honest. It was something weird.
She's
I'm pretty sure.
Jin Erso.
That's it.
And so like, you'll have Donnie Yen show up and be like, I'm Chirrut Imwe. And that's the only time that his name is mentioned, aside from like a couple of places where people call him Chirrut and like in passing. And like, just guys, write your characters' names into the dialogue some more, please.
Yeah. They also only appear in one movie too, so the fact that the names are strange, a bit hard to remember them in general.
Yeah. The same with
everyone Baby Yoda.
Yeah, he doesn't even have a name yet. We just call him the child, but whatever. But this is the Star Wars podcast. But yeah, no, I don't have that issue here. But like those two, Gabrielle and Arambu, I feel like are the only two characters who really don't add anything to this one. And Arambu, you could argue, is there as like having a red shirt helps set the stakes a little bit. So like we have these birds come and eat a man alive. So that way, when the birds come into the building in the next scene, there's a sense of danger. So like that's serving a purpose. Gabriella, I feel like, is there so that Ryan has someone to talk to for a couple of scenes and Yaz has someone to talk to when she goes off on her own. It's purely functional, those two characters. Whereas with Orphan 55, there's so many of them that no one has enough room to do anything, so they're all pointless. Or they're not all pointless, but they're all impactless. Here, like Jake and Adam, I feel like leave an impact. Stooky leaves an impact. Like whether or not they're as impactful as they could be, that's a different story. But like I can come out of this episode saying, you know what, I liked them. They were good parts.
I just didn't think they left much of an impression on me as characters. That's basically my whole thing. I've forgotten already the name of the villain. Suki, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
The twist was well executed, but then she just disappears apart from one brief scene where she just reappears to be killed off. And, you know, her motivation sort of rushed through, you know, and it was interesting, but I just didn't feel like, you know, she didn't make an impression on me. Astronauts were okay. I quite liked them.
No, see, I really like Suki, and like the thing is, I thought that her death scene was rushed too, but like I would have given her way more to do. I think of what she has, it's really interesting, and the actress is doing a lot with it because we have the twist, and then we have the conversation outside of the ship that is actually pretty lengthy and gives some insight into the character through her performance, if nothing else. You did this thing, this is really messed up, and like you see her face, like she understands that this was not a morally right thing to do, to like going around experimenting on people and infecting them. When she seems kind of happy that she's got the cure, that's not because she's like an evil mustache twirler who's just like, screw you, got mine. She's like, I had to do this and I'm just so happy that it's over finally. Yeah, her face, you can tell she's like, I did what I had to do, but it didn't feel good. It's when they step inside the ship, she actually starts showing the signs of infection. That moves way too fast. That should have been another like actual dialogue conversation. This is one of the few episodes where I feel like it does suffer from what Stu Bagful calls 45-minute syndrome. Normally, he will ascribe that to an episode, and I'll be like, no, the problem isn't that it's 45 minutes. The problem is that we're using our time on the wrong things, because I think there are plenty of Doctor Who episodes that feel rushed in places or feel like maybe they deserve to be longer than they are. Heck, I'll take more of Doctor Who anytime. Like, I'll take hour and a half long episodes. But the problem isn't that they're a certain length. The problem is we're not using the length correctly. There's
also, I think, two-parters that feel longer than they should. That's an issue too.
This is not an episode that I would have said make it into two parts. It's not an episode that needs to be stretched to that degree. We just need to pick specific things and give them a few more minutes. Where, like, this is a 50-minute episode, you could have made this a 55-hour-long episode, and it would have been really, really good. Take out Gabriella, I feel like, or if you're going to keep her, then I say what you do with her and Jake and Adam is, okay, so just to briefly touch on Jake, because he's my second favorite part of this episode next to Suki, because Adam, the actual astronaut, I agree with you, he doesn't leave much of an impression just because he is so defined by feeling jilted by Jake. He didn't show up to see him launch, and he's like really sickly and he's infected for so much of the episode, so he kind of just has to lay there. But, you know, he's endearing enough or whatever. Jake, I think, is actually really interesting because he's kind of a jerk, but he's a jerk entirely for like self-directed reasons. Like it's a lot of inwardly directed hatred because I'm in love with this person who is so extraordinary, and what am I compared to them? And he feels inadequate, and he feels like less of a man, and he feels like he's not worthy of love, and that's really interesting. I love the bit when we get to the ship controls, and he's like, "Is this literally up, down, left, right?" Adam, like, your job is so easy. And then he pilots the ship at the end. And it's not just, oh, he gets to be a big hero. It's he literally gets to do the thing that he feels like Adam is so superior to him for. And he gets to have that moment of like, you know what? Yeah, I am as good as you. And maybe that means I do deserve to be loved by you and I don't have to push you away. And I think that's a really nice and neat little arc that has a beginning, middle, end, and it didn't have to spend a lot of time on it for it to have an impact. But like Suki's whole thing, it's like we've got him and Adam and Gabriella all in the room as the doctor is like, you infected the humans with the Praxeus to experiment on them? Why do the three humans not react to that at all? Why does Jake not have anything to say to the person who took Adam and infected him? Like, he should have a response to that of some kind. And I feel like the reason we don't get that is because, we're running short on time. 5 more minutes to this episode so we can have a conversation of it's like the doctor just so wants to see Suki's plight because she's the one with all the perspective. She's the one who's like, I get where you're coming from. I empathize with you as a scientist. I understand your species is dying and you did what you had to do. You should have Gabrielle and Jake where it's like, you killed my friend. You almost killed my husband. I don't care what your reasoning was. You don't do this. That could be a really interesting discussion if we just had a couple more minutes in the episode. You would only need 5 minutes to make this a great episode, I think.
The episodes were 1 hour, I think, weren't they? Last season.
Was that an hour with commercials? Because I feel like they've been consistently 50 minutes, aside from Spyfall, which was a couple of extra long parts.
Spyfall was an
hour each one. I think the rest have been 45 to 50 minutes.
Yeah, 50 minutes. They usually start at 7:10 here in the UK PM. Finish at 8. So,
like say what you will about rushing and like a case by case, episode by episode, how timing is handled. There has been, I think, since the Chibnall era, a tangible sense of episodes having more room to breathe than the Russell and Moffat eras, and like that just goes to show you really only need 5 minutes for some of this stuff. The whole are 5 minutes longer than a given Russell and Moffat era, and yet the difference is tangible. We're like, whether I think it's a slow episode or a relatively quick episode, the Chibnall era stuff generally feels like it's got more breathing room than Moffat and Russell stuff. And I was like, oh man, I didn't realize how much I kind of wanted this.
It's amazing then that Orphan 55 still managed to feel like about 200 different stories in one. With that long running time.
The episodes need to be 55 minutes, and it all ties together to Orphan 55, which would be better if it just had 5 more minutes.
Here's the thing about Orphan 55, and like let me try to like articulate my previous point better. In any episode, and not just of this show, but in anything, in any movie, you got to balance the exposition with the character stuff. And what this episode does is it does them both really fast. So we've got a lot of really quick exposition, plot. And so we've got a lot of little quick, impactful character moments. So like a lot of the jokes are like very quick jokes. Ryan and Graham is like, I'm not full of plastic, well, you're full of something. And like this is quick, like 2 seconds of like Graham like looking at him and Ryan like, I said what I said. It's like their facial expressions make me laugh a lot. The doctor being like, Ryan, you did it. You saved the day by carrying this dead bird. And Ryan's like, well, I'm here for you guys. Whatever we're tracking is on the other side of that wall.
I think she said something like, I was wondering why you smelled of dead bird, Ryan. Was it the deodorant? I was just thinking it was the deodorant or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the specific line was, but I remember laughing at that.
I thought you changed your shower gel.
That was it. And it sort of fits in with the story as well, so it's one of them jokes that I think really works.
Yeah.
One joke I have to disagree on with you, Nick. When Graham was using the machine, but I've seen that joke so many times before, and I was actually waiting for it to happen, and when she did, I went,
Fair enough. Fair enough. But like, yeah, no, that and like Yaz's little thing of like, well, what's that look for? I thought I discovered an alien planet all on my own. It's like, there is a lot to read into with that line, and you had to spend less than 10 seconds on it. This episode has a really good balance because it knows how to spend like quick, impactful bits of time on plot and quick, impactful bits of time on character. Orphan 55's problem is that it was all plot, and so it's like, we'll have extended dialogues of like minutes at a time talking about plot points, and like that leaves you no time for impactful character stuff. So when you try to do like a character reveal or whatever, you have to rush it because you spent too much of your screen time on the plot stuff. This is the better alternative, where you do plot quick and you do character quick so that you can fit them both in to a relatively small period of time.
Yeah, I agree. 20% of Orphan 55 must have been the woman screaming Benny, and then the other 80% was the plot. So,
well, they spent a lot of time just like driving around trying to find Benny, which could have been used towards that.
Also, I saw someone point this out. He was on oxygen support at the beginning of that episode. Of course, he's going to die, and you're basically wasting your time just like going out there and trying to find him.
Anyway. He's to go get him. See, he has an oxygen tank. He'll make it. I'm like, wait, what? That doesn't have that.
That's less on the characters and more on the writers. Like, you decided that they had to spend this number of minutes in the thing, roaming around, like speaking to each other. We didn't need to have this conversation be this long, but whatever.
I think this is why I can't say it's the worst episode of New Who, because it just made me laugh too much to actively hate it. So
that episode is boring, but I still think it's better than Sleep No More.
I think they're about the same for me.
We'll get to Sleep No More, but like, I feel shallow saying this, but I genuinely think Sleep No More would have been a marginally better episode without the gimmick. I think the gimmick like hurts that episode.
And the twist.
Like, no other episode can be hurt because they don't do that thing with the found footage.
Yeah, but the twist is what really kills it for me.
The twist isn't even the problem. It's just like, I don't want to make this into a Sleep No More review all of a sudden. It's going to be at minimum several months before we do our Sleep No More review. So let me just make this point now. And it's another case of like, Praxeus doesn't have this problem, so learn from this. Sleep No More, by doing the found footage thing, Doctor Who does its dialogue and its exposition in a very specific way. And when you're doing a found footage movie or a found footage show, the reason that those are found footage is that they're usually being done by people who are in the middle of like the action. They're in media res, they're in the middle of the situation. They don't necessarily have time to stop and talk. And when they do have time to stop and talk, it's rare, and it's sort of a break for the audience from a lot of kinetic energy. Like, that's why you have a found footage thing, is it's a lot of things moving quickly, and we got to capture it like you're there in the moment. With Doctor Who, you can't like found footage and then still have the thing of like, every other scene is us stopping to explain something. Like, if you're going to do found footage Doctor Who, most of the scenes have to be the running away from the monster scene or like the intimate character stuff. Like, no one's going to watch a found footage thing to like watch characters exposit at each other about like background details, because then that's like just you're in the room with a bunch of people talking about boring stuff. And like the aesthetic of the found footage hurts the delivery of the exposition, because notice this, in Doctor Who, even if we have a relatively slow exposition scene, it helps like infinitely to be able to cut to something where you don't have to turn the camera slowly to observe this thing that I'm talking about. Now turn the camera back to me so that you can capture my face. That's a very boring visual language for exposition scenes.
And not only that, the person that's filming it is literally eye boogers.
Yeah. Again, tying it back to the episode we're talking about. Imagine if in Praxeus, they're like, Doctor, something bad is happening with the birds. And so you have two options. You can either not take the camera outside and not see Arambu die because we're stuck with the camera inside the room, or you can take like 20 seconds to take the characters and the camera outside of the building so that we can watch Arambu die like off, like in the middle distance, and then we go back inside because we got to get inside where it's safe. That's like 20-40 minutes of characters exiting and entering that you would have to do to service the found footage gimmick.
just oh, so I can hear someone being attacked outside. Quick, let's take the camera.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Let's take the camera so that we can see the thing that we need to see in the other room, and then take the camera back. You're kneecapping yourself. You're limiting yourself so much with the found footage thing. If that's how you choose to do it, like you've got to be smarter than. I'm going to be real mean. You've got to be smarter than Mark Gatiss.
Burn.
Just you wait, Lucy. Just you wait until we get to the Moffat era episodes. I will have like no kind words for Mark Gatiss. It's going to be really unfortunate.
I really enjoy Empress of Mars. Beyond that,
I can't. I don't like it.
I know you don't like it. I think you said it was like one of the worst episodes in history or something like that.
I think it's like it's weird for me because it's like it's Sleep No More again. It's that bad.
But I will defend one episode. I don't think it's great, but I do enjoy watching it. The Crimson Horror.
Was that him?
Yep.
Oh, okay. That was
actually was. I don't like that one very much.
Yeah.
Edward's saying he doesn't necessarily want to do these anymore. If you want to just come to talk about all of them, or even just the Mark Gatiss episodes, Robert, that'd be great.
I think with Mark Gatiss, it's like he does basically, apart from like Night Terrors and Sleep No More, he does the same episode literally every time if you break it down. It's just a historical figure or historical setting with an alien. Beyond that, it's a bit of a blur.
We could make a whole video just talking about Mark Gatiss. So I'll tell you what, let's do that. Let's make a video talking about Mark Gatiss episodes.
Does that extend to Sherlock?
In exclusivity, like Mark Gatiss episodes of this show, just like, let's talk about those because it's going to be a long time before we get to some of them, and I have more points to make, and I think we all have varied opinions about his output. But this is the Praxeus podcast. So
that episode.
But here's the thing about this episode. It's just kind of so boring. I know you like it, Nick, but there's this other things that were more interesting to talk about.
Well, see, here's the thing, though, because I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think this is a pretty good episode, but the problem is it's pretty good in that way where it's like I said, Orphan 55 is like a benchmark bad episode. A lot of Mark Gatiss' stuff is like a benchmark don't do this. This is a very clean, a perfect kind of episode to contrast that with because it's not a masterpiece. It's not anything too great. It's a very clean sort of, here's basic writing things that Praxeus did well that other episodes did not.
Maybe Orphan 55 was deliberately made to make the rest of Series 12 look like the greatest season in history. I think
maybe,
it's
I don't know.
Because I remember watching the Nikola Tesla episode the next week and thinking, this was pretty basic, but compared to like last week's, this was the greatest episode in history. So
I maintain.
Then I watched it for a second time and I was like, nah, it's not that good.
I maintain that the Tesla episode is like legitimately great. It's probably like top.
Okay.
I think it's top 20
villains are pretty
episodes of the show for me.
It's fine.
Hey, I mean, I spent like upwards of an hour talking about all the details that I love in that episode, so I've made my case for that one already.
I do like the writing of Tesla and Edison in that episode. The actual story doesn't do it for me. The stuff with the Rachnos type aliens is just very dull. But it's an okay episode, but it's just kind of like a basic historical figure type episode that I think you get from the new series quite often. So it's sort of like a seen it all before thing for me. But it was fine. Structurally,
I would describe that episode and this episode, to tie back to Praxeus, as like basic in the way that I want from this show. Not so much the I've seen this before element, so much as it is, we're not tying it into a big story arc. We're taking a premise that not any other show could necessarily do, and we're making it all about that. Like, whether it's like other Doctor Who episodes that we've seen, not any other show aside from Doctor Who could do the Tesla episode. And not a lot of shows outside of Doctor Who could do this episode in exactly the way that they choose to do it. And my big hang-up is, like, the most interesting thing in this episode is the thing that we sort of rush to conclude. Restructure this somehow, add a couple of minutes or however you choose to do it, so that, like, Suki and her species and what they choose to do and the moral ramifications of that are the focal point of the story. And if you need, like, a secondary thing, have that be the Jake and Adam, like, romantic tension. Get rid of Gabriella. We don't need her.
Get rid of her.
That's how I would take this episode, from a pretty good one to a great one on the level of Tesla for me. Where it's like with Tesla, there's issues with it that people could point out, but I feel like it's very, very focused. And like everything in that episode is in service of what it's saying with Tesla and with the doctor as like, this is how we view science, this is how we view the morals, the practicality, the nature of scientific minds and stuff like that. And like that episode's very focused, and almost all of it is tied into that broad concept. Here we have a broad concept of like, man, this situation, this person had to make these really harsh moral compromises to like save their own. And is that worth it? And how does that affect the little people? How does that affect the individual humans that they choose to exploit? And we don't quite have that level of focus. Like, just focus it more, and you've got a great episode, I think.
Cut her out. Like, actually, you don't even need like to split like the companions. Like, have Ryan already with the doctor. I mean, he'd be a dead bird anywhere. I mean, he didn't need to go off by himself.
But the thing is, and like, I'll let you make your point, Robert, because I know you were going to make a point. But like, I say get rid of Gabriella so flippantly, but like, there's meat to her too. Because like I said, like Jake has the fact that like they took his husband and like experimented on him, and he almost died. Gabriella's friend actually died. So like, it's not like she needs to be pointless in this episode. It's just we don't give her what she could have, like the meat to chew on. It's like, no, there's a place for her here. Have her be the one who comes up and says, I knew someone who died because of what you did. That's not okay. But we don't go there with it. And I don't know why that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it ties back to my problem of her really being more of a comedic character when her best friend got disintegrated. I think that was a major issue for me. My point was, I think this season in general has been weirdly not very good with focus. Like, for example, Lenny Henry's character in Spyfall, I thought was a pretty good villain. I liked him. Second part becomes more focused on the Master. I think he just sort of disappears right at the end. I think he just ran off.
Yeah, like,
Isn't that what happened?
Like his plan falls apart because he doesn't. It's not like an egregious thing where like he disappears as soon as the Master takes focus. Because we have kind of there where the Master reveal happens, and then the Doctor and companions are split up. So the Master is the villain for the Doctor, and Lenny Henry is the villain for the companions. And that structure works well. Yeah, and then you're right. At the very end, his plan fails, and then he escapes very nebulously. We don't know how or to where. He's just out of here.
He probably won't come back because Lenny Henry's like a huge guest star. You'd think you'd only get for one episode. One story.
Yeah, and his motivations weren't very good. I'm pretty sure he might have done all this just to get back at his mother for not friending him on Facebook. It's in my brain. That's what I'm going with.
Understandable motivation.
I agree. We've had a problem with that kind of focus throughout the series. And Tesla is the one that I think does not have that. And it's why I think it's the best of the bunch so far, where it's like we take Tesla and Tesla's relationship with the Doctor, and Tesla's relationship with Edison, and we take the aliens, and all of those disparate things sort of operate on one axis, and they all sort of feed each other. They all make sense together, and they all conclude together. None of the other episodes have managed to have that kind of cohesion. And it's like, even though I enjoy this episode, give it that kind of cohesiveness, and it becomes a great episode instead of just a pretty all right one.
Should we talk about Yaz? Because everyone's making a big deal about her.
I'm interested in the implications of her here because some people have been picking up on previous episodes where it's like, in Series 11, she and the Doctor were like thick as thieves, nothing could possibly come between them. And we've been very subtly building, of the three of them, Yaz ironically seems the most annoyed or the most kind of a little bit, what's going on with you with the Doctor in Series 12? That would be really interesting. To do the thing that we've been doing and go on a tangent that still relates. You guys know Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., right? And what we do with Grant Ward in that show. Spoilers. Okay.
No. No spoilers.
Very vague spoilers then for Robert's benefit and anyone who hasn't watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Be careful.
There's a character in that show called Grant Ward, and the whole cast is kind of like, they've got their tics and their quirks. He's the generic sort of agent guy. He's very straight-laced. He's very, precise, and he's all about getting the job done. A solid 15, 16 weeks of that show airing, everyone was like, why is Ward here? He's so boring. He's the one character that nobody really gelled with. And then something happens around episode 16, 17, where it's like, oh, he was that way on purpose. And we're doing something really interesting. And he becomes like one of the most fascinating characters on the show. And it's not a matter of like, oh, we heard you complaining about him being boring. No, it was like, no, the character was acting that way on purpose. And like, once it becomes clear what his deal is, he becomes infinitely fascinating to watch. I wonder if we're doing something similar to that, like in Micro with Yaz, where it's like Series 11, she stands out the least of the three because Graham has his grief issues. Ryan has his sort of insecurities about like he's also grieving, but he's mainly defined by like sort of not thinking that he's good enough, his dyspraxia holding him up. He's got all of these things that like he's a very sort of anxious, sort of self-doubting guy. And Yaz doesn't have that thing that defines her. The thing that defines Yaz in Series 11 is that she's thick as thieves with the Doctor. She trusts the Doctor with absolutely everything. She's kind of the most similar to the Doctor personality wise. She thinks the most like her. She says things the most like her. She's the Doctor's like lieutenant. She's the second in command. When the Doctor's not in the room, Yaz is the one that gets stuff done. And like with Ward, that creates kind of a character who's like, it's hard to get a read on you. It's hard to become invested in you because you're so straight to the point. And if we do something similar to what we did with Ward, where it's like, no, we were doing that on purpose. And like the reason that we made them so thick as thieves and like we defined Yaz by that relationship in Series 11 is that in Series 12, it's like maybe the two of them are too similar. And maybe when Yaz says, I want to be in charge, and like in Rosa, where it's like, I work as a policewoman. I'm not where I want to be right now. Well, where do you want to be? In charge. Like that might cause some problems. And so like, what if she becomes like Clara and she's too much like the Doctor? I want to do things this way. Maybe Doctor, I thought I knew you and maybe I don't know you as well as I thought I did, or maybe you're not the person I thought you were. That could be really, really interesting. And that
could be going in the direction, like they mentioned last week's episode, where the Doctor tells them, "You don't know me. You think you know me." Everything like that. So that would be interesting. I was going to say I've actually liked Yaz more this season than I did last season.
Mm-hmm.
I can't put my finger on why though, because it still feels like she's not doing much.
Well,
but it seems like she has a bit more personality than she does last season. So maybe I'm missing. Maybe there's something there that there wasn't last season.
It's all little things, and it's tying into what I'm talking about because in the scene that you mentioned, Ryan is the one who sort of takes charge in that scene and is like, we know who you are. We believe in you. The Doctor says, right. You don't know me. You don't know me at all, not even a little bit. Yaz says, don't talk to him that way. And that's a very snippy, that's not something that you would expect her to say to her. You would expect Ryan or Graham to say something like that before you would expect Yaz to be like, don't talk to him like that. That's one of those things that I think is interesting because, again, it's one line in one episode, but it's this bit of cracks are starting to form between those two. And I really hope that those keep building and that, like, the relationship between the two of them, like, splits into something interesting. At the beginning of Orphan 55, when Yaz is the one who says, you have been kind of moody lately. And the Doctor's like, I'm not in the mood. It's really interesting. Like, we keep doing little things, and Praxeus has been the biggest part of it, where it's like, all is not right in the world with Yaz and 13 in the way that it was in Series 11. And so if that goes somewhere, and like the end result of this is like there's a schism between the two of them, then you go back to Series 11, all of those moments of the two of them being like super simpatico are more interesting than they were on like a first watch, because now I know where this goes. Like with Ward, It's like I go back and I watch him being boring. He's not boring to me anymore because I know what's going on, and I know that this is not a boring character. And that can be what Yaz is. That can be, I know that this is not a boring relationship. We just needed the setup before we got the payoff.
Well, it's an interesting theory, but I'm not going to say anything or not say anything, but I mean, like, make any, like, big assumptions until it all plays out. Because, really, I mean, in this episode, it does stand out some of her moments, but because she's so just there most of the time, she can literally just say hi. It's like, what's up with that?
This isn't a theory so much. This is just my hopes. And again, it ties back to the little comedic bit of, I thought I discovered an alien spaceship on my own.
I don't know if that's comedic, though. I found that more suspicious, like she was trying to hide something.
Like, what would she be hiding?
Like, I think she acts a bit weird. Like I said, normally I wouldn't think this is weird if it was like Clara or Amy or something. She goes back for that thing, that computer screen.
Well, no, see, because I think that's part of her being like the doctor when the doctor's not around. It makes perfect sense to me that she would be the one who's like, oh, you don't like it when I threaten this bit of technology? This has to be important then. One of us has to go back. That thing is clearly important. She's the proactive one. The doctor has to be somewhere else. She's going to go get it. And when she's like, I thought I discovered an alien planet on my own, I didn't take that as overly comedic. I took that as she's kind of bitter at the doctor for taking the wind out of her sails. I found an alien planet. Come check this thing out. Look at what I did.
It's so vague. It can be kind of, looked at many different ways. The way I took it was Ryan says, he was basically asking what's wrong with her because she seemed kind of moody. And she's like, I thought I found, an alien planet. She could be upset because she wanted to be like the doctor, or she could be hiding something. And in the very next episode, she's supposed to have some kind of secret. So that's another reason why I'm a little suspicious.
I don't take that line as tying into that at all. I take that line as Yaz thought that she did something really cool and impressive independently, and then the doctor comes and suddenly that accomplishment is gone. I hope what I think is happening, because it'll be really interesting to square the Yaz that looks up to the doctor and almost sees her as can do no wrong with the Yaz who wants to take charge and wants to be the doctor.
That's a good theory, though. I think if it heads in that direction, it will be an interesting storyline. I don't think it'll be too similar to 12 and Clara, because I think that went in a bit of a darker direction than what this sounds like. I think this will be quite interesting if they do go in that direction.
Yeah, because it's interesting how sort of one-sided it is, because with here, the problem is mainly just with Yaz. With 12 and Clara, their whole thing is that neither of them can function properly without the other, and it's a
toxic relationship.
Yeah.
If they do go in this direction, it's almost like a sort of thing of Yaz becoming a bit bitter or jealous towards the Doctor, do you think, or something like that?
Yeah. What is the Doctor's stance on this right now? Because she doesn't seem to be aware that any of this is happening.
I think that's a consistent character trait of the Doctor as well, she doesn't really take into account the feelings of humans. I think that was a character trait with a lot of different Doctors, because they're too busy, talking, trying to act like the cleverest person in the room. It's remember the scene in say Under the Lake when 12 is sort of ranting on about, how exciting this is. We've found ghosts and then everybody sort of reacts really shocked that he's showing no sympathy to the people who've just died. it's one of those sort of things. So yeah, it sort of fits really well.
That said, I'm gonna let it wrap up here.
I have one thing I'm gonna say before we leave. I think Orphan 55 is a better episode because it's more fun to talk about.
Okay, but
you need to do a whole video on it, dissect shot by shot, scene by scene.
No.
Yeah, you would be an idea, Robert. There we go.
We're not Mauler. We're not doing that.
Now you see, when she says Benny for the 15th time, you can see by this point.
No.
There's only one more time left.
Boris would love it. Get Boris to do that one.
Yeah, he can do it all by himself. He'll be there for 20 hours.
It needs to be 4 hours. 4 hours.
Anyway, it was lovely to have you on, Robert. I hope that we can get you back. I say next week, but the next episode is tomorrow, so we'll see when we have time to record that.
It's been a long delay. That Mark Gatiss video too, potentially.
Yes, let's actually do that.
Do that eventually, but until now, thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you for watching.
Bye.
Bye.